and welcome to the Commonwealth Club World Affairs. Welcome to everyone who's here in person and also watching online. The name of our program tonight is Looking Back, Pushing Forward, a briefing on the state of elder justice in a changing America. This program is hosted by the Grown Ups Forum. The chair, Denise Michaud, is unable to be here tonight. Substituting, yours truly, I'm Elizabeth Carney. I'm the chair of the Business and Leadership Forum, and I'll be filling in for her. I'm delighted to be here to introduce our speaker. He has decades of experience representing elder justice. The other speaker besides Paul, Jennifer Duane, was not able to come due to an accident in the Sierra, and she's sent her regrets, but I'm sure we will have a robust time tonight. Paul has much experience in this subject. He's a retired deputy district attorney who led the Elder Abuse Prosecution Unit in San Diego's DA office for 22 years. He now works with AARP to educate the public, provides training to law enforcement and adult protective services agencies, nationally and internationally. We'll be looking forward to hearing more about your new activities. We're grateful that our speaker can be here to share insights and stories. He has traveled here from LA, so we welcome him, and we welcome our audience here and online. Paul?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Good evening, everybody, both here in person and online. I appreciate your attendance. And just to also explain, life sometimes takes its turns very dramatically. And so this afternoon, Jennifer called me. She has been staying with a dear friend of hers in Marin County, whose husband went on a ski trip. And you may have heard the news this afternoon. Very sadly, 16 skiers were caught up in an avalanche this morning in a resort near Truckee. Thankfully, he is one of the 6 that has been found alive. They don't know what his condition is. There are 10 still missing, apparently, tonight. So our thoughts are with them, with Jennifer, and with her friend, who is clearly in a very anxious state. And it says a lot about the character of Jennifer, who felt and knew that it was right for her to stay with her friend during this very, very anxious time. So, as Elizabeth said, she sends her regrets. But I've learned, too, in my career, and I always tell this to young prosecutors, it's good to prepare, but you should always be prepared for Plan B as well. So this is Plan B for me. And so if we could just, Jennifer had actually created some slides, and beautifully done, thank you. So I won't rely on them totally, but we just want to use this as a marker to cover some of these topics that you see on the screen in front of you. But I looked around the room, and I see we have about 14 people in the room. And I'm used to that, because right now, I'm going to designate you as my jury. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, here in San Francisco. Thank you for your service. You are going to be hearing, over the next few hours, a case of elder financial exploitation. Elder exploitation is on the rise, and this case that you will see involves a 97-year-old lady by the name of Ruth Wine. Ruth lived in San Diego for many years. But sadly, as it happens to too often, too many older adults, she succumbed to that insidious disease called Alzheimer's. And as a result, had to leave her beloved home in San Diego and moved to a memory care facility 28 miles north of San Diego in Encinitas. And one of the things she missed most was her neighbor, Dorothy. And you will meet Dorothy in a few moments. And Dorothy, and I'm sure she will forgive me, you can describe as feisty. Dorothy loved Ruth. And when Ruth was transferred to this memory care unit, Dorothy missed Ruth. And so she decided that she was going to somehow meet up with Ruth twice a month on a Wednesday afternoon. But as she will tell you, Dorothy doesn't drive. So instead, she hired this guy, defendant Donald Wade, a taxi driver, to take Dorothy twice a month up to Encinitas and to spend 3 hours with Ruth. And they had it all worked out. They would pick her up from the facility. They would drive to the beach and spend a few minutes there. And then they would go to her favorite restaurant, a barbecue restaurant. And then, this may sound strange to you, members of the jury, but they would end up at Ruth's bank. Beach, barbecue, bank. Because Dorothy wanted to make sure that everything was controlled with Ruth's bank affairs. And Dorothy made it very clear to Donald Wade, under no circumstances are you going to take Ruth out on your own. Now, 3.5 months ago, it was Dorothy, fell ill on a Monday. And so on the Monday afternoon, she contacted Donald Wade and informed him, I'm canceling this Wednesday's visit. Do you think that Donald took this as an opportunity? Yes. You will hear evidence that on that Wednesday afternoon, despite what Dorothy had told him, Donald drove to Encinitas, into the memory care unit, who obviously knew him well. There was no opposition to him being there. He went to her room and took her from that room in his car. Now, Ruth enjoyed his company. And even though she was inflicted by this insidious disease, she knew enough to recognize him, and she was very happy in his presence. He was charismatic. He's young. He's good looking. He's a talker. And you will hear some of that in the evidence. So where do you think he took her? Do you think he took her to the beach? Do you think he took her to the barbecue restaurant? No. There was only one place he took her, to Chase Bank in Encinitas. And you will hear from another witness called Jennifer, who was the bank teller that had contact with Donald Wade. And she will describe the transaction that occurred that afternoon when he presented to Jennifer a signed certificate of deposit surrender form, withdrawing all of Ruth's money from that CD, all $98,000 worth. And you will hear from Jennifer, and this may come as a surprise to some of you members of the jury, that at no time did Jennifer ever talk to Ruth. She only conversed with Donald Wade, who handed her this piece of paper, and on it were the instructions to pay a third party, Buhane, the co-defendant, sitting there next to Wade. Jennifer asked Donald Wade one question: who is Mr. Buchanan? And you will hear Jennifer tell you that his response, Donald Wade's response, was, that is her lawyer. Ladies and gentlemen, you will hear a testimony that Buchanan is not a lawyer. He is simply a friend, a colleague, a co-conspirator with Donald Wade. And ultimately, you will hear testimony that Jennifer presented Donald Wade with a cashier's check for $97,000 paid to his co-defendant. And you would say, well, wait a minute, Mr. Green, you said the CD was worth $98,000. Oh, yes, it was. But you see, Chase Bank penalized Ruth $1,000 for early withdrawal of her funds. After you've heard all the testimony, I'm going to invite you and urge you and encourage you to return guilty verdicts on the various counts. Count 1 of elder financial exploitation, contrary to Penal Code Section 368 of the California Penal Code, of theft from an elder by Donald Wade. And then count 2 against both of these defendants, conspiracy to defraud an elder involving both of these defendants. And then count 3, a count of residential burglary against Donald Wade, because the moment he entered Ruth's room that Wednesday afternoon to pick her up, he committed burglary by entering with the intent to steal. And then count 4, commercial burglary, that when he entered the bank with the intent to steal. You will hear from various witnesses, ladies and gentlemen, but there's one person you will not hear from during this trial, and that is Ruth Wine. Because sadly, 3 weeks ago, Ruth died. So forgive me for doing that, but I miss it so much. And I couldn't resist it, you being my jury. So there he was, actually picking up the cashier's check. The backstory to this is that they spent all the money, $97,000, within a 3-week period. But thankfully, it was uncovered. And so I was able to have the privilege of prosecuting both those defendants. Of course, I chose an opening statement of a trial that I actually got a guilty verdict on. It would be very brave of me to choose another one, which I could, because there were some acquittals. But it's just an example, ladies and gentlemen, of what is happening right now in the United States with elder justice issues. That case is one of hundreds of cases. That scenario is probably being repeated all over the country, somewhere every week. But I just want to give you the context within which that I ended up doing trials like that for 22 years. I'd been in the office for 3 years, and I joined in 1993. And in fact, you may say, well, you don't sound like you're from San Diego, and that's very true. I'm not exactly your classic Southern California dude, right? But I had been a lawyer in England, and in fact, the reason I moved to San Diego is because of my wonderful wife, who's right there in the road. This is my wife, Sue, and she's from San Diego. And the 2 jurors who missed my opening statement are my son and his wife, but they were held up with other obligations. But the fact is, we came to San Diego in 1991. I had been a lawyer in England for 13 years as a solicitor. I started life as a barrister, but wearing the wig and the black gown didn't suit me very much. So I became a solicitor for 13 years, and then my wife was homesick, and who can blame her? If you thought today was bad, try that 300 times a year, okay? All right, and you get the feeling. So we came here in 1991, and I joined the DA's office in 1993. And after 3 years doing sort of various cases, I was called into the boss's office. And why is it that when you're called into the boss's office, you think you've done something wrong? And I walked in, I could tell he was upset. He said, "Sit down, Greenwood." And I thought, oh, this is not going to go well. And he said, "I've just had a very upsetting call from Adult Protective Services." And you know what I said? "Who are they?" I'd never heard of them. He said, "I don't know, but they're upset." I said, "What about?" He said, "Apparently," he said, "we're ignoring a huge escalating crime called elder abuse." And then I said, my second question, "What's that?" He said, "I don't know, but you're about to find out, because I just named you as the first head of the first ever elder abuse prosecution unit." And I literally walked out of his office in November of 1995 thinking, I'll do that for 3 years, and then I'll get back into the real main hardcore prosecutions that we all dream of doing. How wrong I was, because that became my assignment for the next 22 years. And it's very unusual for someone as a deputy DA in any jurisdiction to spend more than 5 years in any one type of criminal prosecution, because they fear burnout. And yet, for me, I never reached that stage of burnout, because it lit a fire in me. Because what I was uncovering for myself was that this is a whole area that was uncharted territory, that people weren't really recognizing it as a crime, that it certainly wasn't being reported well enough, and it certainly wasn't being investigated, and it wasn't being prosecuted. And so it kind of opened up a whole new area that I didn't realize was there for the taking. But I was also motivated by the example of my own parents. World War II survivors. My dad had been a B-25 bomber pilot in World War II, survived 79 missions, and landed perfectly on 78 of them. But on mission number 4, on June the 4th, 1944, 2 days before D-Day, he was engaged by enemy aircraft and shot down, and thankfully rescued by Yugoslav fishermen. So it was stories that I grew up with that gave me a healthy respect for my parents and for their generation. And so I became one of those people that believed, and still do, that the World War II generation is the finest generation. So when I started in this area, finding cases involving people of my parents' age group, it lit a fire in me. And that fire has never, ever been extinguished. So that's the context within which I came into this field. And since I left the office in 2018, and I reached a crossroads in my career, because in California, we define an elder in the criminal code as anybody over the age of 65. And I was finding in early 2018, at the age of 66, that the last 3 cases that I was prosecuting, my victims were younger than me. And that wasn't a good fit. And I had also been mentoring a much younger prosecutor who had such talent, and I realized that it was now time for him to take over the baton. But at the same time, as that was happening, I was getting more and more calls from all over the country, from police departments, from adult protective services, from prosecutors' offices, saying, "We've heard about what you're doing there in San Diego. Can you come out and spend 24 hours with us and try to motivate some of our folks to join an elder justice team?" And I realized if I was going to do that, then my day job would suffer. So the timing seemed right for me to move into something else. I didn't know what it was until after I left, AARP called me and said, would you be willing to be part of a team that goes out and educates the public on what is out there? And so my focus for the last 7 years has shifted from prosecution to prevention. And that's what I've been talking about a lot recently. We are seeing a lot of challenges right now in the elder justice field. And demographics is one of them. Today, in one day, do you know how many people will turn 65 in the United States? 10,000 people. Now, for those of us who are on Social Security, I just read an article yesterday that on the current levels, the funding for Social Security will run out in 2032, that's got alarm bells. Now, they're saying that Social Security won't collapse, but if we are to believe what's in the article, they're saying, though, that millions of people will lose a lot of their Social Security income. Demographics is a big challenge for all of us. And by the year 2035, they are telling us that there will be more people in this country over the age of 65 than children under the age of 18. Just let that sink in. But here is what I have spent years talking about, and I'm frustrated about. Wherever I speak and wherever I go, one of the first questions I ask is this. In a county or in a state, wherever I am, how many employees are there in Child Protective Services? And then I ask, how many employees are there in Adult Protective Services? And do you know what the ratio is? It's typically at least 7-1 in favor of Child Protective Services. And in some states, it's as big as 10-1. There are some states where an APS caseworker has to drive 300 to 500 miles sometimes to reach a client because there's no one else that can do that. They are so understaffed, under-resourced. Thankfully, during COVID, fundings actually boosted their budgets for the first time ever, and they were able to use that money so wisely. But now that funding has stopped, and they're back to some challenging issues. So demographics impacts on funding in so many ways. But also, recruiting is a big challenge for all of us. Recruiting people to become, for example, Adult Protective Services caseworkers on the front lines. I have really, over the years, grown to appreciate so much what APS caseworkers have to deal with on a daily basis. Walking into homes where there's a hoarder, walking into homes where there is total neglect and filth, walking into homes where there's danger. And so often they walk into these homes without the backing of law enforcement to help them. To get people to become a social worker in APS, where the funding may not necessarily be the same as for a child protective service worker, is challenging. So recruitment of APS, recruitment of law enforcement, it's a big concern. We are seeing law enforcement leave because of the morale, which is unfortunately not high these days for various reasons. And then within my own profession, recruitment of prosecutors. This is unfortunately a big, big challenge. And to get prosecutors or law students to become prosecutors these days is a big, big challenge. One of the visions I have is over the next few years, I want to visit as many law schools as I can, at least to fire up, try to encourage law students to think about becoming a prosecutor rather than a private attorney. And then, of course, artificial intelligence. Boy, hasn't that impacted elder justice issues over the last 3 years. Through my role with AARP, I have talked to many victims who have become victims through artificial intelligence generated fraud cases. And as you know how it happens, now we have so many deep fake videos, right? We have audio fake tapes. People believe that they're speaking to or listening to their grandson who is in jail or has been kidnapped, and it's all fake. And we are seeing a huge increase in the number of victims of what we call the romance scam. And along those lines is the accessibility to cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency itself is not bad, but it's the scammers and the fraudsters' delight. How accessible is it for any one of us right now to convert money in our wallets into crypto? It is so easy. Just go to your local supermarket. The number of ATM machines that have been converted to accept notes, banknotes, to be fed into a machine, which is immediately then converted into crypto, Bitcoin, or whatever type of cryptocurrency it will be, is frightening. My own local Vons in Escondido has that in place. There are hundreds of ATM locations in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I would urge you, the next time you walk into your local supermarket or into your gas station, look to see if that machine, which used to be the one that was green and took the jar of coins, remember those Coinstar machines? They're all being converted now, because how many of us carry pennies around anymore? So Coinstar is now converting those machines into cryptocurrency machines. So if you walk into your local supermarket and find the kiosk, touch the screen to see if it does take money to convert into crypto. And then if you're there and you see an older person standing by that machine looking confused, I can almost guarantee with absolute certainty that you are looking at a victim right there in real time who is being defrauded by a crook who is in their purse on the phone listening in to the conversation. This is happening every day, every week in the United States somewhere. I was in South Carolina with my wife earlier last year in the summer, and we heard at one gas station, a lady had deposited $100,000. How long does it take to deposit $100,000 in $100 notes into a machine? It takes a long time. What did the gas station attendant do? He gave her a chair to make her more comfortable. He had no clue that what she was doing was part of a fraud. So one of the challenges we have is to make people more aware that this is going on everywhere in our neighborhoods and in our communities, and to ask people to be more vigilant, and if you see something, to say something. You may have seen it on the TV. More and more of the media, the news, are sharing these stories of where people have spotted these victims at these machines and have called law enforcement in to intervene. And that's been fairly successful. But too many cases don't ever get reported or intervened in that way. So we're seeing that. And it's not just older adults who are the victims of these cryptocurrency investment scams, because a lot of them start with the romance relationship, but then it leads into money, and it leads into, I've got this wonderful investment opportunity, and I'd like you to partake in it. And that's how it occurs. But it doesn't just affect 75-year-old victims. My wife and I just had lunch 2 weeks ago with a 52-year-old professional who is very successful and who was on LinkedIn and was invited to connect by another professional, she thought. And as a result, they talked offline on another app, WhatsApp, and they started talking business ventures. She's never seen him. He always had an excuse why he couldn't get on camera. And ultimately, he persuaded her to cash in all her IRA investments. But it was only for a short period of time, and that's how she convinced her financial advisor this was okay, because she's got all the contracts and she's going to be repaid within the 90-day period, which has to happen, otherwise the IRS is going to come down hard on you. So over $600,000. And then to discover it was all a fraud. 52 years old, professional. And that story is not uncommon. It's happening everywhere, every week in this country. So, and by the way, the sting in the tail is that not only did she lose $650,000 to the scammer, the IRS is now penalizing her to the tune of $280,000. So she's in the hole for almost $1 million. But it's not all doom and gloom. We have, and this is what I've been involved in for the last few years particularly, what we call elder justice task forces. I am a total believer in, if we are going to make a dent in this insidious crime, that we need to work collaboratively together. That it takes social services, law enforcement, it takes prosecutors, it takes financial institutions, it takes auditors, it takes psychiatrists, psychologists, it takes a whole bunch of people working together to be part of the solution. And thankfully, we have developed, but not enough, we've developed several very effective elder justice task forces. And I'm proud to tell you that after I left the DA's office, my successor there started this elder justice task force in San Diego involving the FBI and all these other agencies that I've told you about, including postal inspectors, the U.S. Attorney, the Attorney General, and Adult Protective Services. And now they're really having a big impact. But we need more of these all across the country to understand the need for them. But this is not just an American problem. Elder abuse is a crime that is occurring throughout the world, but it's finally got the recognition it deserves. And so now we are actually working more closely together with other countries, such as Australia, such as the United Kingdom, such as Canada, and working to share information on a much more high-level international basis. And I'm really encouraged by that. Many of these fraudsters, as we know, work overseas. During COVID, there were a number of casinos, particularly on the Cambodia and Myanmar border, that were emptied. And as a result, these international gangs saw a phenomenal opportunity to move into these buildings, the empty buildings, and create what we effectively are boiler rooms. And that's where they work. They have literally hundreds of employees calling people all over the world all the time, hoping to get the next victim on the phone or online. And many of these employees themselves are victims because they've been trafficked by the crooks, enticing them to come to these buildings with an offer of a lucrative salary, but as soon as they arrive from other countries, they take their passports and they effectively are in servitude, working 17, 18 hours a day, calling people in the United States and elsewhere. And that's how it works. And I know that for a fact because, and I'm sure you get the same calls. I have a landline. And I know the younger generation goes, excuse me, what's a landline? I know. But some of us have landlines. Our landline gets calls at least 7 or 8 times a day, to the point where we don't have the ringer on anymore. And I shouldn't do it, but I do. I answer, and I listen, and I engage. And we always tell people, don't do that. And that's true. We shouldn't be doing that. But I do it for educational purposes for me. And it's always overseas that the call is calling me from. And this is global. It's huge. But one other thing that I'm seeing is of real benefit is this public-private coordination, which has been springing up over the last 2 or 3 years. One of the most exciting ventures that I'm very proud of is a new coordination that has started with AARP, working with Walmart and with Google and with Amazon. And it's being called the Elder Financial Coordination Center. And funding is coming from these heavyweights to fund that. And it's hopefully going to become a center to collect all the data from all these cases of reports of fraud coming from wherever, to consolidate them and try to put them together and then issue them out to federal prosecutors all over the country in the hope that they will take these cases and run with them. But that is just one example of a private-public coordination, and we need so much more of that. This is happening too. When I started out in 1996, there was very little training for law enforcement. But thanks to something called EAGLE, which stands for Elder Abuse Guide for Law Enforcement, this is now a wonderful tool that any law enforcement officer in America can access and be guided through with tremendous resources. We're seeing more and more effective trainings for police officers on how to respond to these cases. And it's not just fraud. There is my assignment as an elder abuse prosecutor involved so many more types of crimes. The number one crime was obviously fraud. 65% of all my cases involved some kind of fraud. But in addition, physical abuse of older adults, primarily by sons. That was huge. We've all seen recently the terrible double murder of husband and wife allegedly by their son in Hollywood, right? And the classic profile that I dealt with week in and week out was of the drug addicted or alcohol addicted or gambling addicted son living at home with his widowed mother, unemployed, lazy, and sometimes afflicted by maybe a mental diagnosis. And he would steal from his mother in order to feed his addiction, and that often included jewelry that he would steal or her pension check. And when she found out, there was a confrontation and she would end up in the emergency room. That was such a typical scenario that would be repeated week after week. And sometimes tragically involved, worse than that, with homicides that I handled. So there was that, there was neglect cases by caregivers involving elderly people left with terrible bed sores and other things. And then there was abandonment, isolation, mental and emotional abuse too. So it covers a whole range, and that's why the training is so necessary for law enforcement. One of the biggest frustrations that family members have and that I've heard so much about is that, well, Mr. Greenwood, it's all very well. I tried to report it to law enforcement. I tried to tell them that a crime was occurring. And I'd say, well, what happened? And sometimes the response was, well, did anyone threaten you with giving them the money? No. Did anyone pull out a gun? No. So you sent the money without a threat? Yes. And the response is, well, then there's no crime. That's what some law enforcement have said in the past. I've had other cases where law enforcement have literally turned to the victim and said, do you want to press charges? And the response is, well, no, it's my son. And so they close their case. And that's wrong. Or where law enforcement has said, but Greenwood, look, we didn't follow the case because she's 94. She's not going to make a very good witness in court. She's got early stages of dementia. And so I would have to say, no. Take the report, bring it to me, and let's see what we can do with this case. So there's lots of ways in which we can train law enforcement to overcome these basic misconceptions. Another one was, well, it didn't happen in our jurisdiction. The crime occurred elsewhere, so we're not going to get involved. And I said, hold on. Was there an email? Was there a phone call that came in to the victim who lives in your jurisdiction? Yes. Well, then you've got the ability to take this case. The crime occurred here. But the good thing is, as I say, the improvements have been immense. Now, I just want to briefly go over, this is something that Jennifer would, and I've obviously taken a lot more time on my segment than I would have done if Jennifer had been here. But she wanted to share with you about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, where she was a senior program analyst for, I think, 15 years until she retired in January of 2025. But you may have heard of the CFPB, and it has various missions, one of which is to enforce the laws of financial institutions, to make sure that financial institutions are following the correct procedures. It's one of the functions of CFPB has been to hold banks, credit unions accountable when they don't follow these. It also provides a program of education. Jennifer was very involved in spreading wonderful resources of material about educating the public, the consumers, about how to avoid becoming a victim of some kind of fraud or scam. And they were very successful in recovering large amounts of monies, whether it be through fines or through lawsuits, in order to establish a victim restitution fund. But the problem has been, as you may have gathered over the last year and a month, the whole appearance of CFPB has changed dramatically. It's still in existence, but it's certainly not where it was 2 to 3 years ago. So one of the things that Jennifer wanted to show you was this dramatic increase in the number of reports that financial institutions have filed with law enforcement over the years since 2014. And you can see how it has jumped dramatically, particularly since COVID, when the fraudsters saw a tremendous opportunity to take advantage of people who were isolated socially, and where there was far more communication online, through email and through Zoom calls. And so what you're seeing here is a reflection of what we call the number of suspicious activity reports filed by banks and credit unions. And then this is an interesting graph that Jennifer wanted you to see. So this is looking at the age groups, okay, showing what people have lost. And in fact, what is interesting is that the older population has lost proportionally a lot more to the scammers than any other age group. And it's, again, dramatically increased over the years. Jennifer was going to talk about the impact of these crimes on older adults, particularly. People on a fixed income are suffering huge impacts. And this doesn't even go as far as it should, but people who lose their homes, who lose their life savings, and ultimately, unfortunately, victims who've lost their own lives by taking their own lives. But this is what Jennifer has been involved in for so many years, as I have, the powers of partnership involved in this, particularly in what we call financial abuse specialist teams. Tomorrow, I'm going to be on a call with the El Dorado County FAST team, which is made up of sheriffs, police departments, adult protective services, banks, credit unions, and other social workers. And they focus on cases that are brought to their attention and discuss them in confidence and try to find solutions. And CFPB has really been pushing these task forces throughout the country. So just to give you a snapshot of what's out there, we spend a lot of time encouraging people to get involved. In May, there's a theme of Old Americans Month. June 15th is World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, where a lot of our colleagues use that opportunity to really talk up the need for more action on these kinds of cases. And we really are urging people to join a local elder justice network. And if there isn't one in their community, to think about actually starting one. And there are ways that we can help to do that. And the important thing is to help break through this barrier of silence. We get all these stats that tell us, for example, I've seen it so many times, 1 in 44 cases of elder abuse is ever reported. And I go, well, how do we know that? How do we know it's 1 in 44? We have no idea. We know that we're only catching a small percentage of the actual cases because too many victims, unfortunately, are embarrassed about reporting it. And breaking the silence is the biggest challenge that we have out there. And we do it through education, through fraud awareness seminars, through online seminars, whatever we can do. You can do it, you can help. And the final thing before hopefully you'll have some questions and some comments is to give out some resources. This first one is really important. If you know anyone, particularly who's a victim of fraud, please have them call this number, the AARP Fraud Watch Network phone number. Because you don't have to be a member of AARP to take advantage of it. You can call it. There are trained volunteers who will listen, who will encourage the victims to be part of a support group, which is fantastic, and actually help them in so many ways. The second one is the FBI. They have a website, ic3.gov, that will take the report from anybody to file a report of a fraud. Locally, we have the Institute on Aging in San Francisco, and they primarily focus on caregiving resources. So if people are feeling in need, they need help and direction on where to go, where I can get a caregiver from, what kind of caregiving can be offered, they are a wonderful resources. There's the National Elder Abuse Hotline that people can call. And of course, there's nothing like if it's immediate and urgent, then we call 911. And then finally, the Adult Protective Services reporting line number for anybody within the county of San Francisco, although I'm sure if somebody's in San Mateo County or Marin County or somewhere else, they will give you the right number. But this is the number for Adult Protective Services in San Francisco. So with that, I'm going to invite you to ask some questions. There's no question which is off limits. I love spontaneous questions, but it's always difficult for the first one to come up and ask a question.
So while you're all thinking about your question, and we're inviting you to come up to the microphone to ask it in person, I'll give the first question from the online.
Thank you.
And they ask, is there legislation to watch in California protecting elders from abuse or fraudulent timeshare sales practices?
Yes, fraudulent timeshare practices is a recurrent theme. I'm not sure of any specific California legislation that addresses the timeshare, how it's conducted, but it falls within the general realm of, were they told things that were false? Were there misrepresentations made to induce them to sign a contract? And if so, then there's clearly existing legislation that would cover that practice. And there's even civil remedies that can be enforced against any company that is operating an unfair type of business practice. But there's other legislation that has recently been passed in the last 2 or 3 years involving, for example, the operation of these cryptocurrency kiosks, where now for first-timers who are using a kiosk, there's a restriction on how much they can take out or put in on a daily basis. But there are several states that are going further than that, and there are in fact some jurisdictions that are in fact trying to abolish the cryptocurrency kiosk altogether from their own jurisdictions, which may be something that California should be looking at if the same trends are being repeated, which is people losing large sums of money. So thank you for that question online. Any others, please? Thank you, sir, very much.
Are there any groups you think should be a bigger part of detecting, preventing elder abuse that have really not been at the table like they should be? We will try to protect you if you're calling out anybody that you don't want to be calling out, but I think there might be groups out there that could be helping us more.
Yes, that's a great observation and a great question. Yeah, there's always groups, and in fact, instead of labeling the group generally, I would say within jurisdictions. For example, in some jurisdictions across California and across the United States, the DA is missing. And that is, for me, very frustrating. The DA should be the first one at the table, should be there inviting people to join them in a collaboration. Sometimes it is the police chief or the elected sheriff that is missing from the equation. And the excuse that is used is we don't have enough resources to send somebody to that meeting or to be involved in that. So I really think that in every jurisdiction, the key players should be not only local law enforcement, it should be a postal inspector, it should be somebody from the Social Security Administration, it should be somebody from the IRS, it should be the U.S. Attorney, the Attorney General's office should have somebody there because they cover particularly fraud involving Medicare recipients. And then obviously your local social services. So again, I wouldn't just chastise generally a group or an agency, but within a jurisdiction, I would. But you obviously have something more. This is good. This is good. Thank you.
Well, I want to go back to your story
Yes.
that you started with.
Yes.
Because, and I can't remember everybody's name, but there was a teller
Yes, Jennifer.
there, Jennifer, thank you. And I think you even made the point that she didn't actually talk to Ruth.
Correct.
Right. So I'm wondering, are financial institutions not doing everything they could to keep an eye on our seniors and the money that they're taking out? You'd think there might be some amount of responsibility that a financial institution could bear.
I love it.
Just trying to suggest
What-
a group that might be more at the table than they are.
Oh, thank you. And he's not a plant, by the way. This is a perfect scenario that I'd love to get a question on. You're absolutely right. This drives me nuts that when I hear stories about, and that was the perfect example, where the bank teller ignored Ruth completely and was actually flattered by the attention from this young, good-looking, charismatic figure called Donald Wade. And yes, banks and credit unions should be doing far more to train their staff. Our own neighbor across the street from where we live 2 years ago called me up and said, Paul, I'm just about to go to the grocery stores to purchase $29,000 worth of gift cards. But I thought I would check with you first. And I said, okay, I'm coming over. I said, Pat, do you really have $29,000 cash? She said, yeah, I went to the bank this morning to withdraw it. And then, of course, she told me the story how she believed that her bank account had been infiltrated and she was being told on the phone by the fraud investigator to move her money into a safe haven called gift cards. So I took her back to the bank to redeposit the money, and then I spent an hour and a half with the bank tellers and with the bank manager, imploring them and asking them, why on earth did you allow a 91-year-old lady in broad daylight to walk out with $29,000 when she has never, ever withdrawn more than $500 in her life in one time? So there's so much more that banks and credit unions could be doing. And one of the things I think they should be doing, well, two things. They should be up on the latest scams and frauds, and they should know how to ask questions. They ask a very general question. Do you know who this money is going to? Yes. Oh, but can I ask, what's it for? Now, we all know the victim has been told by the scammer to lie to the bank. So they're always told, tell the bank it's for home improvements or something similar. So they say, oh, it's for home improvements. Oh, okay, no problem, I'll give you the money. No. One of the questions of which I really hope that banks would ask their customer, having taken them into a private room, is your telephone, your smartphone on right now in your purse? Is somebody eavesdropping on our conversation? And in 99% of all the bank transactions where this fraud occurs, that's exactly what's happening, is they're eavesdropping to make sure that the victim actually goes through with the transaction. So thank you for raising that point. There's a bank called East West Bank, and they've just got me involved. So I'll be doing a series of trainings for their frontline staff over the next 6 months. So we need more banks and credit unions to step up and do this kind of training for their frontline staff. Thank you. Donata, would you tell them?
And there's AB 871 at the state capitol again this year, trying to pass that same training requirement for banks. I really wanted to go back to the beginning, Paul, when you were talking about your story that you got to spend 22 years working with elders, and how important that level of knowledge really is to gain, to have the understanding, to have that seasoned perspective of what an older adult might be going through when they're experiencing these crimes. And it seems like it's rare. Like, how can we do, what can we do to encourage more jurisdictions, more DA's offices, more law enforcement, the judges, anyone who gains that level of expertise in their professional capacity to get to stick with that population, that group of people that they're helping, rather than that idea that we need to somehow rotate out to gain more skills or experience in the fields that we're excelling at. I don't understand it. And I just think that seems like you got to do it. How do we let everyone else have an
Yes.
opportunity with such a, there's so much to learn about this group that it just gets more complex as we go along.
Thank you for that. That's so true. And one of the frustrations that we feel is that we start working with a detective for 2 years, and boy, the detective comes through with some great investigations and reports, and you do some good cases together, and then you hear, oh, I've just been moved, I've just been transferred. And you go, why? There's a couple of things. For me, it lit a fire in me. And because I was one of those people that thought I'd do it for 3 years, right? So I think it does require that. It requires an individual response from that person. And there are some people for whom it's not going to be cut out. It's just something they've been told to do. And they'll do it. They'll go through the motions, but they don't feel invested in it, as I did, because of the comparisons with my own parents. And I'm pleased to tell you that my successor, Scott Perello, that I mentored for 8 years, has the same passion, and he's going to be there for another 15 years, I'm sure. I think part of it is also convincing young prosecutors that these cases are not only worthy, they have such compelling reasons why we should spend time with, these victims. It's so funny. Let me tell you a quick story. When I first started out, my gang prosecutors made fun of me. You can always tell a gang prosecutor because they walk differently. Actually, they don't walk, they swagger and they bow. They go, "Hey, what's up, Greenwood?" And then they would deal with the toughest crimes. And they would make fun of me by saying, "You're doing elder abuse?" And they would mock me and say, "Who have you upset in the office?" They saw it as a demotion. But after about 2 years, that all changed because they saw the type of victims that I would walk to court with. Do those victims have jury appeal? Oh my goodness. They ooze it, and whereas what's a gang victim to a jury? A gang victim is a member of the rival gang who got shot. Does that person have jury appeal? No. So these gang prosecutors turned from ridiculing me to being insanely jealous of me, to the point where my victim's in the elevator with me and I could see my gang prosecutor thinking, "Oh, Greenwood, can I borrow her for 5 minutes?" And so that's part of it, is convincing prosecutors that these cases are provable and they are worthy of our time, because these are part of the finest generation. But that's what we've got to do. But if the passion is not there, then we're up against a brick wall. Please, another question. Thank you. And this is Nick from the San Francisco DA's office, by the way.
And we're happy to have you here, and you get to be the last question.
There you go.
Perfect. So, Paul, with the complexities of fraud and with elder fraud cases, we're seeing there's more of a personal relationship between the victim and the defendant.
Yes.
And that it's from a position of trust.
Yes.
What do family members need to do to recognize the signs, intervene, and make that initial report to help make it a more reportable crime for all of us?
Thank you. So it is the red flags, and it is sometimes a change in behavior, a change of routine. I still remember a colleague of mine who was a prosecutor in my office who left the office. He came in to see me one day. He was distraught. He was angry at himself. He said, "Paul, I should have known it." His own mother had become the victim of the grandma scam. He said, "She never drives at night. But for the last 6 weeks, she's been driving at night. When I've been phoning her at 7 p.m., she's not been there." And I was asking her afterwards, "Where have you been?" And she would always lie to me and tell me, "Well, I'm out doing early Christmas shopping for the family," whereas she was going to buy gift cards. So changes in routine, changes in behavior is a big red flag. Talking about the new best friend, "Oh, I've met this wonderful person." Be inquisitive. Where have you met them? Do you actually know them? Have you met them on camera? Have they been asking you for money? And I know it's sometimes a delicate situation to be, as a younger person, to be asking an older parent about their finances. But sometimes we need to do that, and we need to talk openly about these things. And if you do have a gut feeling that something is wrong, I would always say, call Adult Protective Services, let them figure out if there is something going on, because silence is the biggest barrier and the enemy to all of us, and it's the friend of the fraudster. Elizabeth. Oh,
It's all right. In Olympics, they do that too. I just wanted to say thank you so much. Your presentation has been so informative and so enjoyable to hear these stories and help us to know what are some of the things that we can do. So thank you. And we miss Jennifer, but you've been speaking with Paul Greenwood about elder abuse, and we really thank you so much. And we thank all of you, the audience here in the room, and also online. Thank you.
thank you.